Two lifeless bodies sprawled across a living room carpet in suburban Detroit. One belonged to Kesha Williams, a wife who had once vowed to remain loyal through every hardship life could throw at her marriage. The other belonged to Damon Hayes, the personal trainer who had promised her an escape route into a different existence entirely. What responding officers failed to grasp in those opening minutes was the true nature of the man they discovered seated in the kitchen, blood staining his clothes, utterly motionless. He hadn't fled the scene. He hadn't attempted to conceal himself. Instead, he remained fixed at that kitchen table, having just uncovered the single most crushing act of treachery a human being could endure, and this wasn't merely a story about infidelity. When patrol officers located Jamal Williams that night, there was no chase, no struggle to detain him. He sat there in silence, eyes locked onto a pile of medical invoices and tuition statements scattered before him, receipts documenting years of financial sacrifice for a woman secretly preparing her exit strategy, for children who carried none of his DNA yet had claimed every ounce of his devotion. His first statement to law enforcement carried a haunting simplicity: "I gave her everything. Every single thing." Yet spread across that same tabletop lay proof of something far more calculated and cruel. Financial records with specific transactions circled in ink, a life insurance contract bearing recently updated signatures, and a smartphone screen glowing with text exchanges chilling enough to freeze blood in veins. Messages reading, "Once he's out of the picture, we'll finally have what we deserve." Another stating the physician warned his cardiovascular system couldn't withstand additional strain. And the most bone-chilling exchange of them all, suggesting perhaps waiting for nature to intervene wasn't necessary at all. What had begun as a simple extramarital affair had metastasized into something exponentially more sinister: a calculated scheme, a methodical blueprint, quite possibly an attempted homicide. Today's investigation plunges into a saga where devotion, deception, and betrayal collided with catastrophic consequences, a tale where treachery cut so deep it nearly claimed a third victim alongside the two already lost. Stay tuned, because this narrative twists into territory far darker than anyone could anticipate. Rewind the clock 6 years to New Hope Baptist Church, nestled on Detroit's east side. Every Sunday morning without fail, the second pew from the front held the same familiar faces. Jamal and Kesha Williams, flanked by 4 children arranged like a descending staircase of ages. Amora, just 6 years old. Jalan, 8. Zara, 10. And Malik, the eldest, at 12. To outside observers, this family radiated everything admirable about blended households succeeding against the odds. Pastor Jerome Thompson recalls them fondly, describing them as the congregation's shining example. Jamal never referred to those kids as stepchildren, he explained. "It was always my kids, my family, without hesitation." Jamal clocked in for night shifts at Ford's Rouge manufacturing facility, grinding through 12-hour rotations 4 times weekly, earning $28 hourly plus overtime compensation. The paycheck wasn't extravagant, but it provided consistency, funding dance lessons, football equipment, and annual summer trips to Cedar Point Amusement Park. Kesha's schedule ran during daylight hours at the Osborne Community Center, where she organized after-school programming for $16 an hour. Combined, their income stretched thin, but their household overflowed with warmth. Antoine Jackson, a former colleague, still speaks about Jamal with genuine admiration, describing a man generous to a fault, perpetually boasting about his children's academic performance, athletic achievements, and personal milestones. The pride radiating from him was unmistakable. But here's what elevated Jamal beyond an ordinary devoted stepfather, and simultaneously what made the eventual betrayal cut so unbearably deep. Back in 2015, when Jamal first crossed paths with Kesha, she was a single mother buried under crushing financial obligations. For children fathered by 3 separate men, none contributing consistent child support, eviction warnings piling up, government assistance keeping the family afloat. This was the type of hardship that crushes most people entirely. But Jamal didn't simply develop feelings for Kesha as an individual. He became invested in the potential he saw within her children. Within half a year of dating, he'd already covered expenses for Malik's football gear. By their first anniversary, he'd relocated the entire family into a spacious 4-bedroom residence situated in a superior school district. By year 2, he completed formal adoption proceedings for all 4 children, granting them his surname and a future their biological fathers had never provided. Dorothy, Kesha's mother, remembers his commitment vividly. Jamal used to insist that bloodline didn't matter to him, that he intended to finish raising those children regardless of who fathered them. And he demonstrated that commitment repeatedly, working extended shifts specifically to fund Zara's piano instruction. Their wedding ceremony took place in 2017, inside that identical sanctuary they occupied every Sunday. Kesha wore a white gown while her children escorted her down the aisle. Jamal wept openly during his vows, pledging eternal love not just to his bride but to her children as well. For a full 24 months, everything unfolded exactly as a family should function. Then arrived March 15, 2019, the date that shattered their entire foundation. A severe stroke struck Jamal at age 37. Medical professionals classified his survival as nothing short of miraculous. Kesha maintained a constant bedside vigil for 3 consecutive weeks, sleeping upright in hospital furniture, spoon-feeding him ice chips, streaming gospel music from her phone speaker. Patricia, an ICU nurse who witnessed this dedication firsthand, remembers being genuinely moved, believing she was witnessing authentic love in its purest form. But nobody observed what transpired once visiting hours concluded each night. While Jamal battled for survival, Kesha was silently tabulating the mounting price tag attached to his continued existence. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, doubt began creeping into her calculations about whether this sacrifice remained worthwhile. The rehabilitation process proved brutal. 18 months spent relearning fundamental skills, walking without collapsing, speaking without slurred syllables, even signing his own name legibly again. Medical debt accumulated relentlessly. $50,000 for hospitalization alone, $1,200 monthly for prescription medications, $800 weekly dedicated to physical therapy sessions. Their entire savings evaporated. Credit lines maxed beyond capacity. Full-time employment became impossible for Jamal, as the stroke left permanent damage, chronic exhaustion coupled with tremors affecting his left hand. Landander Rogers, his physical therapist, observed his weekly battles firsthand, describing a man who fought desperately for every single step of progress despite arriving already depleted from part-time work obligations, then pushing through additional hours of grueling therapy, all while fixated on returning to normalcy for his family's sake. Unfortunately for Kesha, that timeline for recovery moved far too slowly. That's precisely when Dr. Patterson introduced a suggestion that would ultimately unravel everything. Caregiving responsibilities create genuine psychological strain, he advised, emphasizing the necessity of self-care to prevent complete burnout. Elite Fitness, located along 8 Mile Road, became the setting where Kesha first encountered her future partner in crime, Damon Hayes, 25 years old, a former collegiate basketball athlete who had transformed his physical prowess into something considerably more malevolent than anyone suspected. Damon's true expertise extended far beyond sculpting bodies. He specifically hunted vulnerable women, targeting those navigating divorces, widowhood, or troubled marriages. His methodology followed a precise sequence. First, establish credibility through fitness achievements. Second, cultivate emotional attachment via personalized attention. Third, systematically sever their connections to outside support networks. Fourth, extract financial resources. Fifth, orchestrate death disguised convincingly as natural causes. Tiffany, a fellow gym member, recalls his magnetic presence, how he projected an aura suggesting limitless possibility, that transformation into someone entirely new remained within reach. For Kesha, already suffocating under medical debt and caregiver exhaustion, that seductive promise proved intoxicating beyond resistance. Their affair ignited roughly 3 months into her personal training sessions, involving covert rendezvous at his apartment and late-night phone conversations disguised as nutritional guidance calls. However, Damon's ambitions extended far beyond physical involvement. He craved entry into her broader existence, her finances, her family structure entirely. Tamika, working reception at the gym, noticed a disturbing pattern in his behavior. Damon consistently probed for details regarding Jamal's medical condition, his prognosis, his insurance coverage, and his capacity to return to work. At the time, she assumed this reflected genuine concern. In retrospect, she recognized it as calculated intelligence gathering. This wasn't Damon Hayes' inaugural attempt at this exact scheme. Law enforcement records eventually revealed 2 prior relationships involving married women whose husbands perished under circumstances that raised significant red flags. Tanya Mitchell, back in 2016, lost her husband to what was ruled an accidental tumble down a staircase, resulting in a $200,000 insurance settlement. Candace Brooks, in 2018, experienced her husband's death attributed to a medication mix-up, generating a payout of $150,000. Both women had trained under Damon previously. Both collected substantial insurance proceeds. Both vanished from public view shortly following their husbands' burial services. Damon Hayes wasn't functioning merely as a fitness instructor. He operated as a predatory killer, utilizing gymnasiums as recruitment territory and insurance fraud schemes as his ultimate financial reward. Kesha was on track to become his newest collaborator in this deadly pattern. By the summer of 2020, Kesha had established a concealed bank account. Come autumn, regular fund transfers were flowing through it consistently. Yet unbeknownst to Jamal, the financial theft represented merely the opening phase of something far more sinister. Investigators would eventually recover Damon's personal notebook, filled with page after page documenting Jamal's daily patterns, medication schedules, and physical vulnerabilities, alongside potential scenarios for accidents that could occur during his continued recovery period, plus research materials exploring methods for inducing another stroke through combined psychological stress and pharmaceutical interference. Their intentions extended well beyond simply abandoning Jamal. They were architecting his actual death. The scheme's brilliance lay in its straightforward execution. Jamal relied on 3 separate daily medications for post-stroke management: blood-thinning agents, blood pressure regulators, and anti-seizure compounds. Any interference with this precise regimen carried the potential to trigger a second, possibly fatal stroke event. Text message evidence extracted from Kesha's device exposed the conspiracy's disturbing specificity. Damon had messaged suggesting that, according to a pharmacy technician contact, doubling his blood pressure medication for a full week before abruptly discontinuing it entirely would produce the desired effect. Kesha questioned whether this approach might leave detectable evidence. Damon reassured her that stroke survivors frequently forget medication schedules naturally, making this untraceable. Kesha then raised concerns about the children's future arrangements. Damon's response revealed calculated cruelty, proposing they would retain custody of Malik and Zara since those 2 were old enough to choose their preferred guardians, while suggesting social services could absorb responsibility for the younger children. Kesha's deception ran even deeper than the medication scheme suggested. During Jamal's struggle to resume employment, she persuaded him to elevate his life insurance coverage from $100,000 to $300,000, framing this decision as securing the children's future should complications arise during his ongoing recovery. Trusting completely and grateful for her apparent foresight, Jamal signed whatever paperwork she presented without hesitation, even expressing gratitude for her forward planning. What remained hidden from him was that she'd simultaneously convinced him to execute an updated will designating her as sole beneficiary of everything he owned, including the family residence, his pension benefits, and full custody rights over all 4 children. This carefully constructed conspiracy began unraveling in October 2021, when 16-year-old Malik overheard a telephone conversation that left him deeply disturbed. He later explained to investigators hearing his mother discussing his father's medications, specifically inquiring about dosage quantities capable of causing serious illness. When confronted about this exchange, she claimed concern about accidental overdose risks. Malik remained unconvinced by her explanation, prompting him to take action that ultimately preserved his stepfather's life. He began covertly recording conversations using his personal phone. The audio evidence he successfully captured proved damning beyond dispute. Kesha's voice questioned how much longer they needed to wait, expressing exhaustion with maintaining pretenses. Damon responded, urging patience for just a few additional weeks, explaining that once tax season arrived bringing financial pressure, that stress would provide the perfect trigger moment for their plan. Kesha sought reassurance about the scheme's reliability. Damon's chilling reply invoked his previous successful experience, describing the formula of stress-induced stroke, medication complications, followed by a grieving widow narrative as essentially foolproof. Malik found himself paralyzed by indecision regarding this devastating information, torn between loyalty toward his mother and protecting the only genuine father figure he'd ever known throughout his life. For 2 agonizing weeks, he carried this crushing secret privately until November 18, 2021 arrived, the day everything finally detonated. That particular morning, Malik reached a decision that would alter everyone's trajectory permanently. He contacted Jamal at his workplace requesting a private lunch meeting, just father and son alone together. Once seated across from each other, Malik's voice trembled as he explained there was critical information regarding his mother that Jamal needed to hear immediately. Then he played the recording. Jamal's entire world crumbled within that diner booth. The woman he'd nearly sacrificed his life to survive for, the woman who'd received every ounce of his devotion and resources, wasn't merely engaged in infidelity. She was actively orchestrating his murder. But an even more devastating revelation followed immediately after. Malik, tears welling in his eyes, whispered that his mother had been slipping additional pills into his morning coffee for approximately the past month. He'd been secretly monitoring this behavior, where she assumed he remained oblivious. The pharmaceutical tampering had already commenced in reality. Jamal's recent episodes of dizziness, his heightened fatigue levels, occasional bouts of confusion, none of this represented simple stress symptoms. This constituted attempted murder disguised beneath a facade of loving caregiving. That afternoon, Jamal made a decision that likely preserved his survival. Rather than immediately confronting Kesha directly, he reached out to the single individual he trusted completely, Detective Rashidita Coleman, a longtime family friend connected through their church community. Detective Coleman vividly remembers receiving that terrified phone call, Jamal's voice shaking as he explained his belief that his wife was actively attempting to poison him, and that he possessed concrete evidence supporting this claim. Within merely 2 hours, an undercover investigation launched into motion. Authorization for phone surveillance came through swiftly, monitoring operations commenced immediately, and what law enforcement uncovered revealed a conspiracy far more intricate than initially anticipated. The financial paper trail proved extensive, spanning 8 months during which Kesha had siphoned $73,000 from their joint accounts. Even more alarming, she'd exploited Jamal's social security number to establish credit cards, secure loans, and even initiate reverse mortgage applications against their family home. The debt accumulated fraudulently under his identity exceeded $150,000 total. Detective Coleman clarified the full scope of this betrayal, explaining that Kesha's intentions extended beyond simply abandoning her husband. She sought to demolish his creditworthiness entirely, seize every asset he possessed, and leave him financially devastated regardless of whether the murder plot succeeded or not. However, the most incriminating evidence emerged from Damon's phone communication records. Call logs revealed contact with a veterinary professional based in Southfield, someone possessing access to potassium chloride, a compound capable of triggering fatal cardiac arrest while remaining virtually undetectable during standard autopsy procedures. Recovered text messages confirmed they'd already procured this lethal substance. Damon had messaged confirming acquisition of the compound, describing it as tasteless, odorless, and perfectly suited for their purposes. Kesha inquired about proper dosage. Damon specified merely a few drops mixed into his morning coffee would produce cardiac arrest within an hour, appearing entirely consistent with natural causes. Kesha followed up regarding insurance implications. Damon's final relevant message confirmed immediate payout eligibility, with no investigation typically accompanying deaths attributed to natural causes. Investigators recognized they weren't simply documenting an extramarital affair anymore. They were actively working to prevent an imminent murder. Arrangements were finalized to apprehend both conspirators the following morning. However, Jamal remained completely unaware that this official police investigation was already underway. His only awareness centered on the horrifying reality that his wife was actively poisoning him, plotting his death, and systematically stealing his children's inheritance and future security. This knowledge consumed him entirely, eating away at his psychological stability with each passing hour. November 18th transitioned into November 19th. Sleep and appetite abandoned Jamal completely during this period. Every instant Kesha handed him coffee, every gentle kiss she placed on his forehead, every declaration of love she voiced, He now recognized these gestures for their true nature, calculated preparation preceding his planned execution. Around 6 o'clock that evening, Kesha announced departure for group fitness training at the gym facility. But Jamal understood the actual truth behind this claim. He recognized she was actually meeting Damon to finalize the remaining details of their murderous scheme against him. That night, Jamal secretly followed Kesha's vehicle, though her destination proved not to be the gym at all. Instead, she drove directly to Damon's apartment complex situated on the west side of the city. Through his apartment window, Jamal witnessed them spreading documents across the kitchen table, papers he immediately recognized as duplicate copies of his insurance policies, his legal will, and confidential medical records. They were literally finalizing operational details surrounding his murder. For 2 grueling hours, Jamal remained parked outside, silently observing the two individuals actively conspiring to end his life. He watched them share laughter together, exchange passionate kisses, and count stolen funds representing money extracted from his children's rightful financial future. But what he witnessed next sealed their collective fate permanently. Through that same apartment window, Jamal observed Damon retrieving a small glass vial containing clear liquid, the potassium chloride solution they intended to deploy within his morning coffee the very next day. Kesha lifted that vial toward available light, examining its contents with the reverence typically reserved for precious jewelry. She then kissed Damon with genuine passion, as though celebrating an anticipated financial windfall approaching rapidly. That moment crystallized a horrifying realization within Jamal's consciousness. The following morning had been designated as his final day of existence on Earth. He drove home in a fog of racing thoughts and mounting dread. Should he immediately contact Detective Coleman? Should he confront the conspirators directly himself? Should he simply gather the children and disappear entirely? But upon entering his residence and observing family photographs adorning every wall surface, images capturing birthday celebrations he'd personally organized, graduation ceremonies he'd attended with pride, Christmas mornings where these very children addressed him affectionately as their father, he arrived at an alternative decision entirely. He resolved to conclude this situation permanently that same night. When Kesha returned home around 11 o'clock that evening, Jamal sat waiting silently within the living room. Across the coffee table, he'd meticulously arranged incriminating evidence, financial statements, text message transcripts Malik had recorded, insurance policy documents, and most damaging of all, printed purchase records confirming the potassium chloride acquisition. "We need to have a conversation," he stated, his voice unnervingly composed and steady. Kesha froze immediately in the doorway, color draining from her complexion upon witnessing evidence displayed across their coffee table like closing arguments in a criminal prosecution. She attempted to explain herself. Jamal cut her off sharply, demanding to know how exactly she planned to justify poisoning him for an entire month, stealing resources meant for their children, and orchestrating his eventual funeral arrangements. Precisely at that moment, their front door swung open unexpectedly. Damon Hayes strolled inside as though he held ownership over the property, calling out casually before abruptly stopping mid-sentence upon discovering Jamal seated there, surrounded entirely by physical evidence documenting their conspiracy against him. The three individuals now formed a devastating triangle comprised of betrayal, deception, and rapidly escalating violence potential. "Isn't this rather perfect?" Jamal observed with terrifying calmness in his tone, the devoted wife alongside her accomplice, caught completely red-handed. Damon initially attempted deflecting the confrontation, claiming ignorance regarding whatever accusations Jamal harbored. Jamal responded by systematically revealing his complete knowledge, the attempted poisoning, the potassium chloride purchase, the insurance fraud scheme, and crucially, knowledge of Damon's previous victims, specifically naming Tanya Mitchell and Candace Brooks. Damon's complexion visibly paled upon hearing those names surface, clearly unprepared for his criminal history catching up with him in this moment. He stammered denials, insisting Jamal misunderstood the situation entirely. Jamal countered firmly, revealing he'd already contacted law enforcement, that Detective Coleman had been actively investigating Damon for 2 full days already, possessing complete knowledge regarding the veterinarian connection, the potassium chloride procurement, essentially everything relevant to their scheme. This revelation triggered an unexpected reaction within Damon that Jamal hadn't anticipated encountering. Rather than surrendering peacefully or attempting escape, Damon reached inside his jacket and produced a 9mm handgun, declaring that nobody would successfully involve police against him again. That precise moment marked when Kesha made the choice that ultimately sealed everyone's collective destiny. Instead of protecting her husband, the very man who'd sacrificed virtually everything imaginable for her family's benefit, she moved deliberately toward Damon's position. "Do whatever needs doing," she whispered quietly. Those 5 words represented the ultimate betrayal imaginable. The woman Jamal had nearly perished loving was now essentially authorizing his execution in real time. However, Jamal Williams represented a man who'd already survived a catastrophic stroke through sheer determination and willpower. That identical resolve now fueled something considerably darker within him. As Damon raised that weapon, as Kesha chose her criminal partner over her own husband, as both prepared to complete their murderous plot right there within the family living room, Jamal fought back with everything he possessed. This wasn't merely about preserving his own survival anymore, but protecting his children's entire future trajectory. He understood clearly that should Damon succeed in killing him, those 4 children would remain trapped under the guardianship of a murderer alongside her criminal accomplice. The physical struggle that followed lasted precisely 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Furniture toppled violently, bodies collided repeatedly, and the firearm discharged 6 separate times throughout the chaos. When the violence finally subsided, 2 conspirators lay motionless upon the living room floor while one devastated man sat quietly within the kitchen, clutching a family photograph, patiently awaiting law enforcement's arrival at the scene. Presently, Jamal Williams remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence without parole eligibility at Michigan's Correctional Reformation Facility. The jury required less than 4 hours of deliberation before reaching their verdict, ultimately ruling self-defense while simultaneously determining excessive force had been employed during the confrontation. The 4 children he'd fought desperately to protect actually testified during his sentencing hearing, pleading emotionally with the presiding judge for leniency toward the only father figure they'd genuinely ever known throughout their lives. That $300,000 insurance policy eventually paid out directly into an educational trust fund established for the children's future, representing the singular positive outcome that Kesha's greed ultimately couldn't corrupt or destroy. Meanwhile, posthumous investigation into Damon Hayes uncovered connections linking him to 5 suspicious deaths spanning across 3 separate states. Jamal Williams hadn't represented his initial intended victim within this predatory pattern, but he ultimately became his final one. This has been Crime Vault, exploring narratives where affection transforms into lethal danger and trust corrodes into pure toxicity. Subscribe now for additional investigations proving that society's most dangerous predators frequently conceal themselves behind the very faces we've learned to love and trust implicitly. Because sometimes, disturbingly, the individual quietly planning your funeral arrangements happens to be the exact same person who once promised unwavering love for eternity.